Yo, what is up, everybody? Blind Metal Gamer here, along with Kaira Super Saiyan. How you doing, Kaira?
Doing good, Tim. Good to be back.
It's time for another episode of the Blindside Podcast. In tonight's episode, we're going to be discussing the importance of video game accessibility. We're going to give a little bit of history and then discuss how this can be achieved for future titles. So, if there are any developers out there that are wondering about this, you can use this podcast as a way to get some ideas to improve your accessibility for your games that are upcoming, or maybe improve existing accessibility. Isn't that right, Kyra?
Right. And this is going to be a fun topic because Wyatt here is the more experienced of the two of us in accessibility in video games, but I have actually delved into it a little bit back when I studied game design when I thought I could succeed at it.
All right. Would you like to give a little bit of history of your experiences and maybe some history of games you played that didn't have that great accessibility?
Okay, so here's a good example. I started out as a PC slash handheld gamer, with a little bit of console thrown in, depending on which parents' house I was at. And I remember one day I just toyed around with the settings in this awesome computer game called Zuma's Revenge, which I still have a copy of on my Windows PC, my gaming laptop. And the first time I ever came across any form of accessibility whatsoever in a video game was this cool setting called Colorblind Assist in Zuma's Revenge. You, with a simple toggle switch, you could all the texture mapping on the color on the balls you're shooting at in the game became eliminated and were replaced with these gray blurs so that you could actually see what you were doing. It made it easier for colorblind people to distinguish what they were shooting at. As for games that I played without accessibility, honestly, that's pretty much every game I grew up with. Because I grew up playing racing games, simulations, platformers, that kind of stuff. And you had to have back in those days, you had to have special equipment or mods just so you could have accessibility in your games.
Oh, yeah. I remember that very, very well. Personally speaking, from my experiences, I remember back in the day when there was no accessibility. None.
I remember that too.
And I would be raging on this because, come on, make your game accessible.
Exactly.
Make it an accessible experience.
And this is coming from someone who had to use cheats on pretty much every game they played just so they could succeed. Because as we discussed in the previous podcast, your girl Kyra, she's terrible at video games. Game overing on Crash Bandicoot 1, y'all, bad.
I remember I'm guilty of having to use cheats too.
I mean, I remember cheats is what got me through CTR Night. Is what got me through the original Crash Team Racing. Except for that one track that had the stupid triple jump, and I would fail that track every time and would have to restart the console and start over without the cheats turned on.
I remember, as far as accessibility and history, I mean, I remember for years, and you can even relate to this too, Kyra, we didn't have accessibility. That didn't come into play until what, 2016? They didn't start talking about it?
I'd say the 2010s, because I remember when I would go to game design conferences that my alma mater would host. We would talk about accessibility in video games, but when I was told that there were ways that a person with a limb disorder could play video games, I was shocked. I'm like, you mean to tell me you can manipulate the hardware so somebody with a physical deformity can play a video game? That's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. All it takes is for a lot of people, all it takes is a simple hardware manipulation, and anyone in the world can play a game. For some people, it's a software manipulation, a coding manipulation. If people would just sit down and brainstorm with people who have a basic disability, not an intellectual disability, or mental retardation, we could get a lot done in gaming.
Well, now I'm going to spice things up a little bit. You said a basic disability, not an intellectual one. Now, what if that person with an intellectual disability had something to contribute? Let's say, because I do know of some people
Oh, I do
with
too, but I just don't. There's a lot of logic that goes into making video games. I'm just not sure.
right. But if they're looking at okay, let's say for example, I'll give a good one, Mortal Kombat 1.
Mhm.
A very good example, just released last Tuesday. It'll be releasing uh, the 19th.
Mhm.
Uh, and it'll probably be out as of the release of this podcast. But the
Uh huh.
accessibility in that game, let's look at
Yeah.
that for example.
Yeah.
Screen reader support right off the bat. You got alternate controls, easy button and easy move inputs.
Yeah. I'm not
Um,
saying that intellectually disabled people should be excluded from this. I'm just saying. I'm just saying you need. I'm just saying look at somebody who has studied multiple disabilities or someone who has a disability.
oh,
I'm not saying exclude intellectually disabled people for gaming.
no,
I'm
no, no, no,
saying
no.
I am saying
Gotcha.
get the input from a person who has a disability and who knows knowledge about disability. Intellectually disabled people are important because you and I both know someone who is intellectually disabled.
Hmm.
So I'm not saying exclude them from gaming. I'm saying it's easier to get input from somebody who has an
Knowledge.
yes, someone who doesn't have an intellectual disability
Oh,
because
I got you. What you're saying
no,
now.
you misunderstood what I said. I'm not when I say it like that, I mean someone with an intellectual disability may not have the capacity to give input because it's this
The severity of
gaming
it.
is because programming a game it actually just making a game in any sense, whether it's hardware, software, or coding, requires a lot of thinking. And it may make me sound ableist, but you got to remember, I'm thinking from a logical and intellectual point of view.
Right, right, right. Um, and and it does take all those things. Um, now what I'm, again as a gamer, what I'm seeing as far as accessibility improvements, what really got me into it?
What?
The Last of Us Part Two.
Yeah, what really got me into it was The Sims, and I would probably say The Sims 2 probably did because all of a sudden, because the original Sims you only had you only had really two options, adult and child. Sims 2 you had 5 different life stages that you could customize. Go into Sims 4 now, you can't just customize, you can do more than customize age. You can actually add physical disabilities like a hearing aid or physical scars or pronouns or gender customizations. Honestly,
Wow.
we're getting to the point where the fine line between disability and non-disabled is
It's
is
getting blurred.
blurred in a video game,
Okay,
and I think it's wonderful.
so let me ask you this. I was talking about The Last of Us Part Two, just how it got me into the accessibility aspect. What it did was it opened my eyes to, hey, this can be done from a
Hmm.
gamer's perspective.
Exactly.
It can. These developers can do it, and then
Yeah.
the PS5 comes out.
Hmm.
Okay, it has a built-in screen reader right out of the box.
Hmm.
And I'm pretty sure, and you can elaborate on this. For those developers to put screen readers in their games, they have to code it in, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. It's not so they can't just like flip a switch and say, here it is, boom.
No.
If they could just imagine, they could make every single one of their games.
Exactly.
But
Now.
unfortunately, it's not the case. Now that we've got, and I one game I played, moving back to the when without accessibility and I would use cheats, Turok
Hmm.
2.
Yeah.
Now,
Now, one thing I would like to see, especially with PC games, is there are so many PC games out there that require keyboard and mouse input. I would like it to where you could use I would like it to where you could just use your screen on your PC just to interact with the game because so many people they can't interact with a keyboard and mouse like that. It's the same problem with controllers. If we could make it to where we could
right.
use our voices, or I know there's a huge debate about AI right now, but if we could make it to where we could use sophisticated AI to to make it to where anyone can play a game, that would be phenomenal.
Oh yeah. Now, Kyra, here recently, what's a game that you played that had just over the top accessibility, just bukus of accessibility at launch?
At launch, See, I haven't really delved into accessibility features because unlike you, because I don't have a specific physical impairment that allows me. That not allows me. That wrong word. That requires me to need stuff like a screen reader or controls like that. But you know, I've heard you have talked, Reese. You've talked in depth about games that have a lot of accessibility built in from launch, and so I think it would be good if you talked about those kind of games.
All right. Well, like I said, what really got me into it was The Last of Us Part Two.
Mhm.
A friend of mine, by the way, shout out to the beautiful and vivacious Denver Queen.
Mhm.
She's awesome, and we, might be able to maybe have her on the podcast again at some point. Maybe we don't know. She's got other non-podcast related stuff going on at the moment,
Mhm.
but she told me, "Hey, The Last of Us Part Two is coming out, and it's going to have good accessibility." And by the way, shout out to Super Blind Man. He's awesome.
Mhm.
He's awesome. So is Rattlehead, Blind FGC Rattlehead. They were accessibility consultants for Mortal Kombat 1 that just came
Mhm.
out. So, and Super Blind Man worked
Mhm.
on The Last of Us Part 2. And he might be working on other stuff. We don't know.
Exactly.
Because he can't, you don't know what they're up to.
No.
And when they announced that he was at the helm of that MK1, that I just knew
Yeah.
it was going to be. And The Last of Us Part 1, that remake,
Yeah. Now.
again, you just knew.
Yeah. Now, what I think on the flip side, what's a game you encountered recently that frustrated the snot out of you because it lacked accessibility? And I'm talking about in today's society where it's not as acceptable as it was.
Okay. Now, not really, it didn't really frustrate me, but it
Mhm.
inspired me.
Mhm.
Have you ever heard of a game called Thymesia?
We've talked about it off the podcast. I remember us having conversations
Um,
about it.
I like the gameplay in Thymesia. It's good.
Mhm.
It's challenging, but good. But I
Mhm.
feel like, Souls like and Bloodborne like games
Mhm.
can be made accessible. I
Yeah.
get they want challenge. I get the hardcore Souls like, and this applies to Souls light games like Stray Blade
Mhm.
um, as well.
Yeah.
There can be elements in there that can make them accessible. I did a very in-depth video on how to make a Souls like and Souls light game accessible for players with disabilities, what
Yeah.
features can be used, and if you would like, I'd like to maybe diatribe on that for a bit and explain in depth how this would work.
Go
In my
ahead.
and this is all in my head. So
Go ahead. That's the
okay,
point of the topic today.
okay. Now, with a Souls like, for those of you who don't know, it consists of challenging combat in 3D environment. You explore the world, get lore, and these enemies are tough as nails. They will kick your butt in one shot, um, or two or three. Now you're wondering, how can this be made accessible? Well, okay, let's say you explore the world and you need help with navigation,
Mm-hmm.
navigational assistance.
Yeah.
That's not going to interfere with the combat difficulty. Okay,
Exactly.
now let's say you're walking and you come up on an enemy. Okay, it's got auto lock, which is great. That's good. But I think what they really need to do is maybe if the combat difficulty needs to be toned down for those that need it,
Mm-hmm.
allow that to be a thing. Because I know a lot of Souls players get very uppity about the difficulty of the combat in their games.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it would make it too easy. Now, Stray Blade does something about that. You can lower the combat difficulty in that game.
Difficulty settings should be mandatory in games because there's people like us who have trouble in even the most basic games because it's not because I and and remember, guys, this is not related to my disability at all. This is because I have lack of skill. Um, there are people like me who just, have bad luck, like my experience with Crash One. If those developers would let us change the difficulty settings so that we could have a decent chance at being in the game, I think that would be great. But at the same time, game developers would be like, well, how the heck are we supposed to challenge the players?
Now, this is really big for FromSoft. I know they're notorious for you get what you get out of the box,
Beanox and Activision are like that too, and Naughty Dog is infamous for
Now,
it.
Naughty Dog, now, hold on. Naughty Dog, The Last of Us Part 2 and 1 allows you to change that combat difficulty.
They've come a long way then, because they didn't do that with the Crash trilogy.
Right, well, that was back then.
Right,
Now, with the Souls-likes, okay, I remember a game called Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. There was a big debate on accessibility when that came out in 2018 because, the guy had one arm, so how can we make it accessible? That FromSoft was really adamant, the difficulty doesn't need to be changed. Well, here's the thing. Combat difficulty wouldn't make it challenging. It would make it accessible. It wouldn't degrade the challenge.
Right.
It would make it accessible to someone. Like, okay, let's say, like in Sekiro, you have to parry, right? Let's say you don't know, you can't parry that enemy.
Right.
On regular, if they would allow you to maybe change the difficulty, which would slow the parry timing down to where someone with a motor disability could react,
right,
and get that, and then okay, what about blind and low vision players? Okay, audio cues,
exactly,
not just a cling of the sword, cling. I'm thinking like ding, and then maybe a different cue to let them know they succeeded.
Yeah, I mean, right now, one of the most common accessibility features we see in games is stuff like subtitles for the hearing impaired. That's a great start, but
yeah, it is.
We don't take into consideration, really though, people who are deaf are really the only people who are with disabilities who are taken into consideration with games, which stinks. We have people like you who are blind and people who have physical impairments that need to be taken into consideration as well.
Yes. And okay, navigational assistance. You're probably wondering, how would that work? Well, for example, in The Last of Us Part 1 and 2, as well as the Spider-Man games and God of War Ragnarok, I just named several there with good Navi assist. Click the right stick or the left stick, and it points you where you need to go.
Right.
Or in Star Wars Jedi Survivor, it does that too, in a general direction. And it gives you a ding audio cue.
There you go. It's just simple tweaks. It all comes down to coding at the end of the day.
You're probably wondering out there, how can that assist a Souls-like or Souls-like? It would help tremendously.
Because, it really, really would.
Because a lot of those games have a lot of dark, bland environments.
Yeah.
And if you need that Navi assist, it's not hindering the game's challenge.
No.
You can still explore and still look around for lore and optional boss fights,
exactly,
etc. But if you want to get back on the right path, use the assist. That's what it's there for.
The point of accessibility in gaming is not to make the game easier or harder for somebody. It's to make it so where somebody who's not as able-bodied as we are can actually play and still have a fighting chance.
Yes, and, okay, now you're probably wondering, what about screen reader support in a Souls-like or a Souls-like? Now, that would really help, again, with all the lore, because not a lot of it is spoken.
Yeah, but at the same time, that's getting into muddy waters, because you know how creators get with lore.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about it from an accessibility perspective.
That's true.
Not the creator. Like, I'm not thinking of it from the mindset of, okay, he's going to be creating this thing.
Right.
The screen reader might spoil it. No. That screen reader, all these features, by the way, would be optional.
Exactly. We don't want to bombard people with them if they don't want or need them. We just want all we want is
the option.
All we want is for people to go into settings, flip a few simple, I said
Simple
simple
switches.
switches and be able to have what they need. We want the plethora for people like us. I mean, this all goes back to what I said earlier. All it takes is going into settings and clicking a simple switch. If the programming makes it so,
Yep.
let it be there.
Yep. Now, again, I'm not into coding. I've never coded.
I have, and it's real. If you have the logic and the syntax down, it won't even alter the game. It just makes alter the game's functionality. It just makes it easier for somebody else.
Right, and that's what we're wanting is better accessibility in video games.
Yeah.
I mean, another thing, The Last of Us Part 1, Mortal Kombat 1, then upcoming Spider-Man 2 are all going to have is audio description in cutscenes.
Yes, that is huge because for people like you don't always get to see what's going on.
Right. And I can tell you from experience that audio description has helped, because with a lot of those fatal blows in Mortal Kombat 1, I know what's going on now. The fatalities, same thing. And by the way, we need to diverge a little bit and cast some shame on a certain three-lettered company, IGN.
Oh, yes, IGN.
For those who don't know, IGN made fun of the audio description feature in Mortal Kombat 1. They made fun of it.
They should know better. They are pro gamer, not the other way around.
Yeah, and I remember what the headline said. Blind and low vision players can now have fatalities and fatal blows hilariously narrated to them. Really?
What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that.
No, and I'm thinking again from a perspective of, okay, what if there's a person with a cognitive disability or an intellectual disability that needs that audio description?
Exactly. We know people who that could benefit.
And for them to do that?
Exactly. It's infuriating. I cannot stand it when they treat us like we are infants because we need something that a neurotypical / able-bodied person would not need.
Right. And, again, I'm not trying to be degrading, but that was a missed opportunity for IGN. So if anyone from IGN is watching or listening, you guys need to be the front runners in this. You guys need to be the leaders because this is an opportunity to help push accessibility in video games forward.
Exactly. I mean, take EA for example. They could just be like, "Oh, we're all about the money. We're gonna push everything that you don't want on a game." But no, because we have passionate people working on projects like The Sims, we have a glimpse into what disabilities look like in a simulation game. That is huge.
Right.
Huge.
And I'll give an example. October 26th, 6 days after Spider-Man 2, baby, your boy BMG is going to be stepping into the cage with EA Sports UFC 5.
Nice.
And it should have very good accessibility if they do it the right way.
Yeah.
We'll see.
In the meantime, though, if I want to see real disability stuff, though, in a simulation, Sims 4 allows so much mods. If I wanted to put a service dog in The Sims, I guarantee you there's a mod for that. And if there's not, somebody make one.
Oh yeah, I mean it's insane what they allow. I mean it's nuts. They are allowing for just a lot of different things.
Now, that being said, not all mods that are out there should be approved, but a good portion of them should.
Yeah, not all mods are there but if it's pertaining to accessibility, or in your case, accessibility education, because you could use it for that too.
Exactly. That's the fun. That's what I love about simulation games. They're so visual that all you need is a clear picture and you're educated about something. As long as people take into consideration and research what that disability is actually like.
Right. Now, as for back to accessibility, okay, we've covered Souls-like and Souls-Light. you're probably wondering, what about a wrestling or a MMA game?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, again, the screen reader can be applied to both
Mm-hmm.
because menu navigation, character select, etc. Now you're probably thinking, how in the world can audio cues be translated to fighter MMA games to determine how close or far your opponent is from you or you are from them? And again, audio cues for different strikes, different grapples, um, and then easy button inputs. That's another thing I didn't really cover on the Souls-like or light genres,
Uh-huh.
but it could apply to both. Easy button inputs for attacks, blocks,
Yeah.
and no button chords. If you're wondering what a button chord is, it's where you have to push multiple buttons at the same time.
Yeah.
One game I knew that was notorious for this, and it frustrated me to no end.
Mm-hmm.
Way back in the day, Tekken 3.
That brings me back to a game I used to play. As you know, as of I think 1996, we've had analog, not analog, joystick controls on
Yep,
games. Analog. Okay, I was right. Well, there was this game that came out in 1999 for the PlayStation called SpongeBob SquarePants Super Sponge. And you would think because it came out in 99, it would have analog controls. No, it wanted to be more of a traditional 2D platformer because it was a 2D platformer. You had to play that effing game without analog, and it made it so hard to play. I couldn't even get past the first level because it was so difficult. And I'm like, oh my gosh, guys, just enable the analog. Make it easier for me to move, please, please.
Oh yeah, they were using those dreaded tank control.
The D-pad, yes, you could only move the game with D-pad. And I'd sit there cussing at my TV at my dad's house, turning the analog button on over and over and over being like, why won't this work? Why won't this work? Finally, I had to pull out the disc case for the game. And I look at the back because the back lists whatever controls you need for your game.
Mm-hmm.
Because this was the PlayStation era back when analog. Shoot.
Yeah, back when analog controls were just starting up. I remember that.
Technical difficulties. I'm sorry. Back when analog, was still optional and not mandatory in consoles.
Oh yeah.
And I looked at it and I'm like, son of a bitch! It's a non-analog game. I hate this.
The one game series that I remember not having analog controls, Resident Evil 2, the Resident Evil series.
Oh, that game's hard even with.
God.
Oh my gosh.
I remember I would master it. I just sat down, and this is back in the day when I could just sit in front of a TV, and just figure that stuff out. You know what I mean?
I remember when my controller went out on my PS1 before I finally had to trade it in for my PS2. The controller went out because the wires got crossed, and I would lose control of my cart when I was playing CTR. So I bought a PlayStation controller from a game shop. Excuse me. It was a gosh dang it, analog controller.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to teach myself how to play. Oh gosh, I'm having it. Okay. I had to teach myself how to play Crash Team Racing with. Oh God, I'm gonna with a D-pad. Oh God, whoa. I'm so sorry.
All right, so okay, again, accessibility.
I'm so sorry. Can you mute me?
Don't worry, I got it.
Oh, we're gonna have to edit this out. I am so sorry. It's wet. Oh. Let's just hope. I mean, well, we're talking about accessibility, so there you go. It's my body trying to chime in.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I remember the N64.
Yeah.
And I remember that was the introduction of analog controls. Now you're probably wondering about wrestling games and the MMA games, how that could be accessible.
Uh-huh.
Well, they, like I said, screen readers for the menus, uh, easy inputs for grapples, submissions, strikes, stuff like that, audio cues, the stuff we talked about for the Souls-like and Souls-like games. There
Yeah.
wouldn't really need to be a navigation assist because there's no exploring required.
Yeah.
And then full on, again, full. Now, I'm not just talking screen readers for the menus. I'm
Uh-huh.
talking full on menus, move lists, tutorials, etc. Um, so Kyra, do you remember? Have you ever played any games, not The Sims, or any games here recently that have very good accessibility right out the gate on your Switch?
Not in particular, but I can tell you every time. Oh, you know what though? I did play the Cosmic Shake when it came out,
Mm-hmm.
and I played Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrate when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
Both those games went above and beyond by including subtitles in the dialect so that we could see what the characters were saying.
Right. Was there any other accessibility features on those titles for Switch?
There probably were. I'd have to go digging into the games for research just to answer that question. Because once again, I'm not the type that needs accessibility in a game right away.
Right. With me, that's one thing I look for. Now I know a lot of people, myself included, would love to see. You know how they have the ESRB for rating the games to help parents, and guardians determine what is appropriate
Oh
for
yeah,
their
and
kids.
sometimes ESRB doesn't always make the right call. But most of the time they do.
Right. There's there should be something similar for accessibility features. That way, when a person goes to buy a game, let's say I wanted to buy a game off of Amazon, just as an example, and I wanted to know what accessibility am I getting right at launch when I buy it. They should have a rating system for accessibility and let you know up front what you're going to get when you buy it.
They could honestly, they could probably expand ESRB by including it in the ESRB. That way, everyone could mean. Well, actually, no, that might not work. But it was a good idea and thought, though.
Well, maybe they could have rated M for mature and playable by everyone or accessible. Something.
Oh yeah. Or we could switch to what we could do is we could switch to the PIGI format, which is used in Europe.
Yes, the PIGI. I know the PIGI. Yes.
And then by using PG is used by age only, not by general audiences. And then from there, we could use a description on the back that says this game is intended for such and such.
Right, but what about the accessibility features? What about, let's say I picked up UFC 5.
That's what I meant, though. Like, what I'm saying is on the back, you could specify this game is for these particular audiences under the ADA.
Oh, and then it would list what accessibility features. Okay,
exactly, because the front is only big enough for the title and the
rating
ESRB/PG. But if you included that information on the back, where if you're gonna look at for the game features anyway, it's a whole new world.
Right, and I don't think we need to switch to the PIGI system.
Well, maybe not, but even if we do, at the same time though, the context of whether it's just because ESRB is a little broad, it can be a little bit broad, whereas PIGI can be more precise. And I'm not saying we need to switch our rating system because we're American, not European, but that's just something to consider as well.
Right. But, that's very, very true. I mean, you can have these accessibility features on the back, and then maybe on storefronts. I know that Sony is starting to include accessibility features on for their games. So that is a start right there.
Yeah, you can include them in the web and the online store description when you're reading about the game without even having to scroll to the reviews or anything.
Right. Now, one thing the PlayStation Store has a lot, like there was a game called Bramble the Mountain King. It looked cool, right?
Right.
I look at the accessibility features. It
Mm-hmm.
does not have what I need. Am I going to buy it? No.
No.
See?
Yeah.
And but see, one thing I noticed though too, a
Mm-hmm.
lot, not every developer is going to display those features. But I
Right.
think what they should do is, make it where these have to be a part of the release. So, that way,
If it were a big enough push, we could get the entire entertainment industry to have it mandatory under the ADA.
yeah, it should be mandatory. It should be because,
And I'm not just talking video games either at this point. I'm talking TV shows,
oh
films,
yeah, oh
everything.
yeah, oh yes. To briefly diverge off topic,
Mm-hmm.
Netflix has audio description.
Right.
Okay, now back to screen readers. Another game I got with a screen reader, very good screen reader,
Mm-hmm.
Diablo 4.
We talked about that one off the podcast as well.
Yep, and speaking of, I need to get back into that game too at some point.
Yeah,
But
there's some games I need to get back into.
I'm just kind of. But the point being, it's accessible.
Yeah.
It's
At the end of the
accessible
day,
fully.
you want an accessible game.
Yes. And I think that what these developers need to do, and I notice not all the developers are displaying their accessibility on the PS Store.
Mm-hmm.
That might be because they haven't done so yet, or they might be NDA stuff. But I think what they should do before the game comes out
Mm-hmm.
is just have that information available to the consumer. That way they don't, that way you can do that research and determine, okay, is this purchase going to be one that's going to be worth my money? Because I cannot tell you how many times I would buy a game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this looks pretty cool. This looks badass. And then I would be raging. I mean, screaming.
Raging. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I've had that happen to me. I've heard I would hear so many of these games are good. I buy them usually off eBay so that I'm not losing too much money. Get them home, test them out. They're unplayable because it's
not accessible.
That or they just don't meet my skill level, which is frustrating. Like, here's a good example. I bought a copy of an old GBA SpongeBob game. Mm-hmm. It was the first SpongeBob game in history, and the game was so bad. Not even the save system worked. The freaking save system. It was back. Remember when games used to have the passcode save system because there was no.
Oh God, I remember that. And
it had that, and I would write down the passcode and put it in the next day. It didn't remember any of my progress. I'm like, you friggin' game, what did you do to me? I wouldn't get very far in the game anyway, but it was still frustrating.
You probably used other words that would probably deem this an explicit podcast. Hey, I remember, thank God back in the day, though, for video game rentals.
Yes, that brings me back to a place we've talked about in our podcast before. Movie Warehouse.
Yes, I remember. Okay, I can rent it. If I don't like it, I don't gotta buy it.
I remember one time I had to rent a game. I rented a Mario Party game, mm-hmm. and because some of the mini games had microphone capabilities built in. To my surprise, when I went to go check out the game, and they're like, "And here's your microphone, miss." I'm like, microphone? And I go and play the game, and you have to blow into the microphone or sing into it or speak into it just so you can play the game. And I'm like, okay, that's pretty badass.
Oh, yeah. But, like we were talking about earlier, these games can be made accessible.
Exactly. Any game can be made accessibility if you know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. And I think they should make these games of all genres, Forza Motorsport has blind drive assist.
Yeah.
So it can be done.
I mean, if we can have games that can implement motion controls, which is now considered a failed standard, but that's a whole nother topic. We can have games that are accessible to people with disabilities.
Yes, we can. And, it's up to these developers to get the ball rolling. So I do want to give a couple of shout outs. Naughty Dog. I want to give a shout out to Sunny Santa Monica,
Mm-hmm.
NetherRealm Studios, Insomniac.
Activision for making one of the first kid-friendly skateboard games in history.
I think it's Turn 10 Studios who ever made Forza Motorsport. All these studios are starting to get accessibility.
Right.
And EA, although I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this, shout out to EA for stepping up your game in accessibility.
Exactly. I only know that they do this with The Sims. As for their other games, don't hold me accountable because EA owns several subsidiary companies. So please don't go shouting hate at me and Blind for endorsing EA because let's be honest, y'all, EA is a bunch of crooks. It's really Maxis, their sub developer, that puts all the effort in.
Oh yeah, it's the sub developers that do the work. But come on. The point is here, they give a damn about accessibility. The developers I named care about accessibility. Respawn's another one with Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Granted, I've not played Survivor yet, but I've heard it's improved.
I think didn't Rare Entertainment have some good titles back in the day that were accessible?
Yeah, but now they're owned by Microsoft. So,
but they're coming. Yeah, but they're still making some good stuff though.
Oh yeah, and then all these, and to all these younger developers, all these development studios. I know Overborder Games,
indie developers. They need the love right now.
Yep, that studio Overborder has only 7 people.
That would be an indie then, because if it's, I think the rule of thumb is if it has less than 100, it's considered an indie.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, all these indie developers, if you're gonna by chance listen to this or watch this, I would say maybe take some of the ideas we've talked about and look into ways to implement them because again, Souls-likes and Souls-lights can be made accessible. All these video games can be made accessible.
Exactly.
It's just a matter of, again, educating developers, and that's the point of tonight's podcast.
Yeah.
I wanted to, along with Kaira, spread some awareness about accessibility, how important it is, why it's important, and how these games can be made accessible.
Exactly, because Blind in particular and I both grew up playing games that frustrated the heck out of us for different reasons. Blind for disability-wise, me for skill-wise, but, we both had our struggles with games.
Oh, yeah, and, the point, here being it's 2023, it can be done, it needs to be done, and
it really does
to be standards across the board for Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, and PC.
I mean, we're getting there because Microsoft in particular, I know for a fact, is innovated to where people with physical disabilities can play their games using just a controller alone. So, if big corporations like Microsoft can pull that off, then other companies can make it to where we can play those games.
And then you got, on the Sony side, you have their accessible controller coming out.
Yeah.
So that's coming, which is cool.
Yeah, it's a whole new world out there. But the sad reality is we are in a society where unless you have a mental or hearing disorder, disability, you're stigmatized and you don't get the support you need in any media. The biggest thing we have right now are subtitles and diverse characters, and that's great, but we need more.
Yeah, there needs to be more done. And, to all these indie developers, if you need to look at, the big studios like Insomniac, Naughty Dog, the games that I meant, the games I mentioned, look at those games for accessibility inspiration.
And the other thing is,
they do. It can help.
And the other thing is, don't be afraid to reach out to somebody who works with somebody with disabilities or has a disability for a consulting position. Obviously, not everyone who's disabled is going to be able to help you, like we had a near argument with over earlier. But guess what? That doesn't mean that people with disabilities can't help, because no one has the same disability the exact same way.
Right.
I mean, autism is a huge example with this. You met one person with a disability, you met one person with a disability. You haven't met the same person with the same disability 100 times over.
No, because it's all unique. It's all each its own thing.
Especially with certain mental disorders as well.
Right. And again, I mean, like I said, I've reached, I talked with Overborder Studios,
and I've sat in on consulting sessions with for indie developers that want to educate people on making a game accessible. I wish I could remember the name of that developer who hosted that seminar. That it was a small seminar, and they talked about how to make a racing game accessible to even the simplest of people. And I cannot remember I can't remember the life of me who it was, but it was one of the most educating things I ever sat in on.
And the point being, and when I was talking to Overboard, I just said, hey, if you need help with accessibility ideas, ask me questions.
I mean, Blind is a huge resource. Blind works with the disabled on a daily basis.
Yes, I'm not an accessibility consultant. I don't do what Super Blind Man does. But, I mean, if there's any developers out there that have questions for me about how a blind person or legally blind can play a game, don't hesitate to reach me on Twitter at BlindMetalGamer.
And and if you need a neurodiverse person's point of view, I can't guarantee you I would always answer, but my Instagram is public. It is at Kaira Yukina 93 with a couple of underscores thrown in. We'll have to post that sometime. As long as you don't weird me out, I'd be willing to answer your questions because I have a plethora of neurodiversities. I can probably answer some of your questions.
Yeah, and the same on the visually impaired side. I mean, if these developers have questions about visual impairment, or as Kaira mentioned, I mean, like I said, ask us. You can ask us. We are here to help.
Especially me, because I've been in the video game industry. I know a couple of insider things, and we talked about coding quite a bit. I may not be the best programmer. In fact, I'm probably the worst programmer you can talk to, but I know enough about programming that I can tell you it all comes down to manipulating a single line of code at minimum. And that is a good start. As long as you're not, and this is where I'm going to veer off a little bit, as long as you're not creating a game-breaking loop, like EA infamously did with the original Sims game, where I created an infinite game loop that broke the game and I had to restart the game with, it's going to be fine.
Right. I mean, so really to kind of summarize things, accessibility is important for sure, and it needs to be implemented in these forms of media. Now, Kaira, do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
My closing thoughts is, like I said, do not be afraid to consult people that work with or are disabled, because they can be a huge asset to people. Because if you start to think in the mindset of a disabled person, you're going to make a lot of progress.
Yes. My closing thoughts would be, don't hesitate to reach out and ask. So if there's any game developers, big or small, that have questions for either of us, just ask us. Don't be afraid to not ask, because we might have some ideas and ways of doing things that you might say, hey, okay, Blind Metal Gamer, he goes by sound, or he needs a screen reader.
Or Kaira goes by mods and needs cheats to function.
Right. Or, Blind Metal Gamer might need navigational assistance or color altering things.
Colorblind assist, that was the term you used.
Colorblind assist, right. But today they've got it where you can alter the colors of like your enemies, your
Oh, absolutely. It's a whole new world out there.
Oh, yeah.
Once again, if it weren't for mods, I probably wouldn't know half the stuff I know. Like The Sims 2 we mentioned earlier, the testing cheats in that game opened a world of opportunities for so many different types of players to play. Granted, that also led to a lot of game corruption on your PC, but it was a coding diverse game. We didn't know what we were doing. The developers didn't know what they were doing.
Nope. So to kind of summarize and close up shop on this topic, Accessibility needs to be put at the front and center of video game development.
Not just video game development,
entertainment,
everywhere.
yeah, everywhere. And these game developers and Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, I think that what the three big companies need to do is incorporate accessibility as part of their release standards. Have it where the games have to have X amount of accessibility features and see if it meets the checklist for these features. And really quickly, I would like to give a shout out to Ubisoft. They're the bomb at accessibility. They're real good. They're awesome. So, yeah. But anyway, in closing, I want to thank everyone for watching or listening to this podcast when it drops on YouTube and other platforms such as Spotify, Castbox, Overcast, TuneIn Radio, etc. And until next time, Kaira, would you like to let everyone know what they're going to get in October?
It's Halloween time, y'all. So we're going to be talking about trick-or-treating, Halloween candy, Halloween experiences, the whole shebang. Your girl Kaira, you will learn very quickly. Halloween wasn't always the best for me because having trick-or-treating with a food allergy, it ain't fun.
And you'll learn from Blind Metal Gamer having to go to school on Halloween night and have other academic-related things burdening you. It wasn't fun either. But those are another tales for another time. Until next time, for Kaira Super Saiyan, I've been your host, Blind Metal Gamer, saying so long, everyone.
And this has been Kaira Super Saiyan. Stay golden, y'all.
And peace out.